Tonight's program is called Remote Ham Radio from the Bluegrass State by David Perry, N4QS. And we're going to learn how he moved his shack to a remote location in Kentucky and making it into his DX Dream Station. Dave has been active. I got this right? I got the right program?
I think so.
Okay. He's been active as a DXer contester for over 50 years. He operates CW, sideband, and really other digital modes on 160 through 6. Has all time confirmed as 347 mixed, 342 CW, 332 phone, and 315 digital. Numbers I cannot touch. 9-band DXCC in 99 countries on 6 meters. And he's got 2,700 on the challenge and wants to make the 3,000 club. So that's pretty good stuff. So I want to introduce you to our speaker. And let's without further ado, let's get started with the presentation. I can't wait.
All right, Dave.
Okay. Yeah, it says I can start my screen share. And let's see if we can bring this up.
There you go.
Actually, it's not starting. Why would that be?
You've we're seeing your screen.
Okay. See if I can make it bigger. And when I do the screen, it's not going big. I hate to tell you, we got a little glitch here.
No, it's fine on my side.
I think you're fine, Dave.
Can you see it?
Yeah, it's fine. It's still on the screen here.
Okay. Let me see if I can now. Okay. For some reason. Oh, there we go. Okay. Hello, everyone. And yes, I'm Dave Perry, N4QS. This was a lot of fun to put together this presentation. I've been busy the last four or 5 years putting the station together, and I had never taken the time to gather all my photos and kind of put the whole story together. And it's especially fun to talk to the Central Arizona DX Association because I have a lot of Arizona connections. Many of you may know my dad was born in Phoenix in 1930, and my parents moved out there in 1975, so I've been out there many times. And I'm a graduate of Thunderbird, where I met my wife in 1980. And the first thing I asked her was, "Where are you from?" She said, "Paducah, Kentucky." And, you know, little did I know that 12 years later I would be there. We bought her family business and have been here since 1992. Oops. I'm going to try to silence that. Of course, I have a connection. When I was out in 1980, I was briefly a member of the Central Arizona DX Association. I was there a couple years, and I met Ned. And of course, I knew Bud, and I listed Bud there because I've been part of the Voodoo contest group for a couple of contests, and I got to know Lee and Mike. But Bud and I date back all the way to 1967. We lived about 2 miles apart. And I was a good friend of Bud's younger brother, David. I happened to be over at Bud's house one day, and there he was operating his ham radio station. He was a couple years older in 10th grade. And I said, "What's that?" He said, "That's ham radio." And I just said, "I got to do that." And within 6 months, I had my novice license. And this is a picture of me operating my Globe Scout, which I just loved. What a great transmitter. 75 watts, crystal controlled, really a lot of fun. And my first DX contact actually came probably about my second week as a novice. And I had really struggled. I had made a couple of contacts, maybe in Maryland with a Maryland station and maybe one in Pittsburgh. And it was really hard completing the CW contacts. So one morning I got up at 5:30 in the morning before school, called CQ, and this station kept coming back and I couldn't get the call. I kept saying QRZ, and he was very patient. He came back. I probably asked Kewers at 5, 6 times. K5B question mark KHB, and he just kept at it. And suddenly it dawned on me it was KH6. I had to look it up on a prefix chart, and I realized I was working Hawaii, like my 4th contact as a novice. And it was KH6EXJ, and he QSL within about a week. And that's how I got bit by the DX bug. And I've had that malady ever since. 53 years later, as N4QS in Kentucky, on June 12th, just a few weeks ago, I was eating lunch at my remote shack, and there was a W5 spot said, for Hawaii on 6 meters at FT8. I said, oh, that has to be a W5 from California or Oregon. But I looked him up and I realized he's from Arkansas. Oh my God. So I turned my beam directly to the west. And before I knew it, within 40 minutes, I had worked 4 or 5 Hawaiian stations, my 49th state, 99th country on 6 meters. So I can tell you here today that working Hawaii is still a thrill after 53 years. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Good.
Yes.
Just want to make sure. 4 days later, I worked Roman UR0MC for my 100th country on 6 meters, completing 10-band DXCC. Only took me 53 years to do that. And since then, I've worked 7 more new ones. It's really been a fun summer, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. So after 10-band DXCC, what's next? Well, I first applied for the challenge back in 2015, and when I applied, I had already confirmed over 2,500 countries. And it was then that I started to think about, can I even start to think about 3,000 countries? I mean, what do I have to do it? Back then I had a small crank, a 55-foot crank up tower on a small beam in a city lot. I just had single verticals with not very many radials for the low bands and a very short inverted L for 160. And I had city zoning and XYL restrictions because my wife's a big gardener, so I always had to try to hide my antennas for her. And just general lack of space because I really only had a half acre back there for antennas. So I was trying to figure out what to do. And this is a true story. My wife finally said, why don't you go buy some land? And I said, really? And so I did. And within a few months, I found this spot. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but this is out about 10 miles from my home, out in the country, and this is the plot that I found. It's 3 acres, and it's adjacent to a very large farm. Can you guys see that cursor moving?
I can't.
Okay,
No.
so you can't see the cursor, so I'll just have to talk about it. So it's really this rectangle, which is to the west or the left of that long road that goes down the middle. And it's 3 acres and with a lot of improvements. About a 20-minute drive from my house. It already had a large 2-car garage. And as I said, it was adjacent to that large working farm. And it was much higher. It was 490 feet above sea level, where probably in the city I'm like 290, something like that. So it was really in a good spot. This is a view of the farm from the north end now, looking south as it looks today. And you'll see that building in the middle is the 2-car garage. I converted it, half of it, into my radio room. So I left one side as a garage And then the right side, I put windows in and made that into my radio room. So this is the garage. It was a beat up, dirty kind of cinder block garage. We cleaned it up. I had a good friend who was a general contractor, came in, we put in drywall, insulated it because I wanted it to be climate controlled. And you see the little air conditioner. I have workbenches now back there in the garage where I put work on antennas. And then over to the left there is a little bathroom that we put in. And of course, a septic tank outside. And then that wall we put down the middle. And as you walk through that door, there's my radio room. This is when we're putting the floor in. And wasn't too long when I had it furnished. I kind of got hand-me-down furniture from my wife. And that couch directly faces the main operating position, which is, this is where I normally sit when I'm out there. And I'm out there virtually every day. Being semi-retired, I go out. I even have really work from, it's really my office now as well. And I do a little work in the mornings and listen to the radio and, you know, really enjoy that. And then to the left of this main position is the remote setup. So I actually have two different setups, K3s, amplifiers, everything. And the remote setup is what I use to connect to when I'm at home. And one of the first things I did when I got out there was figure out how to get internet. Now, when I bought the property, I thought I was in Comcast territory, and I thought I would have cable, but I was about a mile short. And when I asked for a quote on what it would take to build out to my place, it took 3-4 days. They came back and said $68,000. And I said, no, why would that be? And they said, well, we're totally maxed out all of our nodes. We'd have to put in a whole new node for your area. You know, it's just a big deal. So I said, well, forget that. So I was a little bit worried there for a while. And when I attended Visalia, was it last year? I remember there was a speaker on remote ham radio, and he said, oh, you can't do cellular. Well, I raised my hand and said, oh, yes, you can. Because with a lot of trial and error, I figured out I was able to get cellular internet working. And I do that with a Cradle Point, which is a commercial high-end router modem that actually has two modems, and one for AT&T and one for Verizon. And then I was able to, via Verizon, get a static IP address with a business plan. It cost me $47 a month, unlimited data. And so I actually have two cellular connections out there, and I've been using it now for 3-4 years, and it works just great. In fact, I'm streaming DirecTV and watching TV, and I'm doing all sorts of other things. I can do Zoom calls out there, everything, and I have no problem. And then when I'm home, which is there on the right, I connect to the remote setup there on the left via cellular. And this is how I do it. You know, the first year or two, I spent a lot of trial and error, trying to figure out kind of the best way to do it. And it fairly quickly evolved to this very basic approach. I have K30 Mini at home. I use remote rig. And then out at the remote site, I use mostly Hamation equipment. I have a 2x8 switch so I can switch between the two K3 setups. And I use SM8 band decoders to follow the K3s and automatically switch antennas. And I don't have the bandpass filters, but I'm going to get them so I can actually go SO2R. And I actually have a second K30 Mini, which I want to install very soon. So I'll have true SO2R from home. For rotor control, I use RT21s, and then I've always used PST Rotator. I just love it. Great little app by Conduit, I think his name is YO3DMU, and it's very easy to remotely control the RT21s with his software. Then for my 4-squares, I use Green Herring. They're wireless remotes, and of course, server and client apps. And then for my amps, I use Elecraft remote apps that control the Elecraft amplifier. So basically, when I'm operating at home, I'm looking at that K30 Mini, and then all those other little apps are on my computer screen, and I have complete control of the station from home. And I'm sure that's a lot like how Lee and Ned have set up their remote station. And of course, there's a little bit different ways to do it, but I have just found this way to be a very, very reliable, just pretty much bulletproof way to do it. And this is Hamation again. Again, that's a look at the 2x8 switch. And the little app that I see below it is what I see from my computer at home. So I always know what antenna I'm using, which radio. And then actually, the thing to the left is one of their ads in QST. I just pulled it because that's basically exactly my setup. I'm using that exact setup as they've advertised. Any questions on that? We can maybe come back for questions later. Everybody still hearing me and everything?
Still hearing you, Dave.
Great.
Yes.
So that's what it looks like from home. That's my setup from home. I have the K30 Mini. I use it every night. I usually get up at sunrise every morning. I really have complete control of the farm from home. So once I got the remote working, well, I got to put this slide in. You ask, why remote? Well, this is why go to all the trouble? Well, just 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, I was at home watching a movie with my wife, about 8 o'clock, and I get a call from my friend Ed, AB4IQ, local ham. He said, Dave, I just worked Korea on 6 meters. So I run upstairs, and within about 4 or 5 minutes, I get I connect, and I'm up and running, turn the beam towards Korea, turn on the amplifiers, start calling, and I don't know if you can see this slide real well. This is actually a screenshot from his computer, and he recorded me working the Korean, and that was a lot of fun. But the whole point is, if you're going to have a remote station, you got to have access to it, because I wouldn't have made that contact if I would have had to drive 20 minutes to get out to the station. And so really my quest for the DX Challenge, it's very important that I have 24/7 access to the radios when I need them. Once I got the remote going, then this was about 3 years ago, I sat down and I had a blank slate. What am I going to do out there? I had this city lot, and I said, okay, got 3 acres. That's not a lot. I'm not going to be able to put up beverages. I'm going to be limited in certain degrees. So what am I going to do? And I had to kind of think it through. And my buddies around locally kind of gave me hard time because I was always changing my mind. And I went through about 9 different versions of the plan. But over time, I started to focus on certain things. First I was saying, do I want it to be a contest station, just general DXing? Do I want to focus on the DXCC challenge? I had county restrictions, not a lot, but I had to think about them, especially if I was thinking about putting up 134-foot, quarter wave vertical for 160. First, I had to think about budget. Do I want guide towers, monobanders? I had to think about long-term maintenance, and there's just many trade-offs involved. in whatever antenna, whatever tower you select. And then I had to think about installation assistance. Don Dasso called me and he heard I was doing this. He said, "Hey, Dave, I got 2 Sky Needles, you know, Big Berthas out in Virginia in a state cell. I can take those down for you, move them out there." And I said, "How do you do this?" He said, "Well, I got to take an acetylene torch. We'll cut them all apart. I'll put them on a trailer. We'll move them out there. I'll set them all up for you." You know, of course, I had no idea how long that was going to take. He couldn't give me an idea or how much it would cost. It would have been a kind of an ultimate solution. But so I had things like that. Do I want somebody like Don Dasso to put it in, or John Cavelli, or do I do it myself? So I went through all those scenarios. And what I really came down to was, the more I thought about it, I said, really, I'm building this for the DX challenge. And my goal is 3,000 band countries, like Ned has already achieved, which is really outstanding, by the way. And the more that we try to achieve this, the more I realize what an accomplishment that is. So when I look back in 2015, you know, I had about 2,500 band countries. And if you look at what if I wanted to get to 3,000, I was going to have to confirm 325 countries on 8 bands. And then between 160 and 6, I was going to have to figure out how to confirm 400 countries. Really daunting, if you ask me. And then if you look at where I was compared to where I needed to be, you could see in red that I really had to focus on primarily the low bands and 6, and then some focus or consideration to 40 and 30, and then really for 12 and 10, just hope we get some sunspots. So with that in mind, I eventually came up with this plan. Now, is this large enough for you guys to see?
Yes.
Good. And this is on my qrz.com page, and you can blow it up and print it out if you want to. This is what I eventually came up with, was 3 towers, a 4 square for 80 meters, and 160 was the big one that I had trouble with. Originally, I was thinking of putting a full-size quarter wave vertical 160 down there on the south end where the 80-meter 4 square is, and then putting that 80-meter 4 square up at the north end of the property. But the more I thought about it, I said, I need to have some way to improve my receiving on 160. So eventually, I decided to go with this plan, which was put the 84 square down on the south end, put in an inverted V on the main tower, which is tower number 1, we'll talk about here in a minute. And then there was a perfect footprint up there on the north end for a 4 square, receive 4 square for 160 meters. So we'll show you here in a minute how that plan worked out. The first project was to put in a tower and to basically get a beam for 40 meters. I didn't have one in the city lot. I had one in Dallas, Texas in the 80s. And I really, in order to get those last 30, 40 countries on 40, I knew I really needed to get a beam. And so I looked at a lot of different options, compared the trade-offs involved, and I settled on eventually the Mosley Pro 67. I mean, I looked at stacks, and I knew Ned was designing that 40-30 combo two element. I was kind of hoping that Force 12 would come out with that. And I looked at a lot of different options, but when I really thought about it, I finally decided, you know, this is a very simple approach. It kind of achieves what I'm looking for. And Ned already, he's achieved 3,000. Excuse me. And he's achieved 3,000 with exactly that, a Pro 67C3. And then I had a chance to use one in P5 at P75RA in Suriname. So I kept coming back to that, although I looked at a lot of different options. And then all I had to decide was what tower and what height. And I spent a lot of time on that. This is the Pro, by the way, putting it together, went together just without a hitch. Everything was accounted for, every nut, bolt, very heavy duty. Once I got it, I was very satisfied with the purchase. And you can see me putting it together on the ground before it went up on the tower. As far as the tower, I looked at, you know, the SS, what are they? The SSVs, was looking at used Ron towers. I had a guy down in Nashville that installed them all over the country. He kept saying, yeah, I'll be glad to do it for you. Put you in a 100-footer or something. I'd say, well, when can you get to me? Well, he said, I'm backlogged for 2 years. You know, he said, maybe I can get you in, you know, in a couple of years. Well, you know, I finally had to figure out a way to put in a tower that basically I could manage as far as the installation. So I drove up to Peoria and I actually toured the Ron factory up there. And very quickly, I took one look at this new RSL tower. And the thing about it that's so unique is it bolts together. And you would say, at first I thought, oh, this can't be very sturdy. But the reason they do that is they can ship the whole tower on a pallet. And that's how it arrived when I got it. And we basically bolted together. Now, this is the 4 sections. Each section is 20 feet. And it might look like it is fairly lightweight, but let me tell you, the quarter sections that you can kind of see are like a 1/2-inch thick solid steel. Each one of these 20-foot sections weigh like 400 pounds. I mean, it's like a 18, you know, the whole thing weighs about 1,800 pounds. This is the top plate. The top plate weighs like 80 to 100 pounds. I can hardly lift it. So we assembled this tower. I had some guys help me, but we did it over time, got it laid out. Kind of gives you an idea what it looks like. Of course, that's a G2800 rotator we put in with that K7 heavy duty, what do you call that? Thing for the rotor clamp. And there's another view of it. Then we started working on the foundation, and I was very fortunate in that this is a 10 by 10 foot by about 6 foot base. But I found a sign company. These are 2 brothers, the Kaler brothers in Paducah. They are a professional sign company. They go all over the country putting in big road signs. And they had been doing our signs for my company, and I asked them, would you be willing to help me? And they did do some work for Hams, but it was hard to get on their schedule. And I kind of asked for like 6 months, when, you know, can you get to? Yeah, we'll get to you. Finally, one day they called on a Sunday night. They said, we'll be there tomorrow morning at 7. I said, okay. And I was very fortunate because these guys knew what they were doing. This is a shot of the anchor bolts, and not only did they use the template that Ron sent, but they took it back to their shop, welded the bottom plates together, made it extra sturdy, put the whole bird cage together as far as the rebar. That just did a very custom job. Poured the concrete, let that cure for a couple weeks, and then they came back with a couple 100-foot cranes. They literally lifted the tower up, swung it over, and dropped it onto the anchor bolts, perfect fit the first time. And John, one of the brothers, went around with his impact drill and put in the nuts, and it was just boom, 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 boom. He was done. It took 5 minutes to install the tower. These guys knew what they were doing. And there's the Pro sitting there on the ground, as you can see. And that same day, they put the Pro on the tower, and there it is installed. So what do I think of the Pro? Well, it's been great. It's done exactly what I wanted it to do. These are just a couple contests. You can see the CQ Worldwide last November. I worked 106 countries on 40. This is, I didn't spend that much time. It was a single operation. I had to spread out my time between the different bands. It allows me to get some runs going to Europe, and actually fairly early in the afternoon. And if I can hear it, I can normally work it. Work some great DX on 40. Marty, A52BH, I worked fairly early on after I had the beam up. And then you see in the DXCC CW test, I made 466 contacts. That was one where I just couldn't stop the EUs. They just kept calling. I mean, I really had some great runs on 40, and then you can see on 20 I did okay as well. The antenna has worked really well on the high bands and helped me work some new ones like BP8PJ on 12 meters. So it's really met my expectations. And the fact that I put it at 80 foot, I looked at some research on that. There was an article in QST about how much you lose and gain based on a 40 meter beam at 120. And I lost you would lose about 1.5 dB at 80 feet. But if you drop down to 70, you would lose 3 dB. And it just worked out that the RSL tower really had a heavy duty version at 80 feet. It was just kind of the sweet spot for that tower line. And so for a lot of reasons, I chose that height. Now you can argue with it, why didn't I go higher? But so far, I'm very happy with what I have. Now the second thing I installed off that tower was the inverted L for 160. Hopefully you can see, if I can't use my pointer, if you can't see that, it's there in the middle. And then, of course, I made that decision to install the receive foursquare. So this is kind of the approach I went with. And the inverted, Ned helped me. We looked at modeling, trying to phase 2 inverted Ls that would terminate up at the tower. But by bringing them together like that, Ned kind of came back and said, you're only going to pick up 1 or 2 dB. It really wasn't worth the effort. So I decided, at least for now, as to where I am, to put in all my effort of putting in the inverted L. It has about 75 feet of vertical. And then it folds over and I run it to my second tower, which is 50 feet. So it's almost, a true L shape. And then what I did was put in a lot of time putting in 80 1/8 wavelength radials. I put in 1/8 wave because that's really all the room I had to get a true symmetrical pattern. And if you look in the handbook, or I think it's the antenna book, the AWL antenna book, if you put in up to 60 1/8 wavelength radials, it gets very close to the efficiency of like 40 1/4 wave radials. So I went with that and actually put in additional ones. And then you'll see the Foursquare is a DX Engineering brand. It's all switched from the shack using GHE wireless remote. And then I split it in the shack, and so I can run it to the RX antenna ports on both K3s. It's a beat up old butternut base, vertical base or insulator that I use at the bottom. And I do have a 1-to-1 balun there, current balun on it. And then that's a shot of the receive Foursquare. It's hard to see because they're small. They're spaced 135 feet apart in a square. And you see the very first one right there in front of you, which is in the far northeast corner of my lot. And of course, there's a shot of the 4 assembled AVAs. And then that's a shot of one of them installed you know, on the other end of where we just were, towards the southwest. So how does it work? Well, I had just had it in for, you know, both working in November of last year for a few weeks. And on December 4th, I worked a B6K for a new country. I guess that's Marshall Islands. And right after I worked, this was right at my sunrise, I get an email from JEAT, and you can read it there. And he says, hey, I'm hearing you on 160, but I can't transmit on 1840. Listen for me on 1908. So I immediately go split. So I'm transmitting on 1840, receiving on 1908, and after I work him, JEAT, this is what happens. I just get inundated with JAs calling me. And of course, I have the receive foursquare pointed to the northwest. And this kind of became a regular occurrence all winter. I worked like 15 that morning. And then like in January and later, I worked like 20 that morning. I mean, I could almost, not routinely, because some days the propagation just wasn't there to JA, but there were a lot of mornings I could get these tremendous runs going. They just wouldn't stop. And it was always right at my sunrise till about 30 minutes after sunrise, and they just kept calling. So that told me that number one, the inverted L is getting out pretty well. It's my transmit antenna. And I'm definitely receiving very well with the receive foursquare. And to just give you a little perspective, prior to 2018, I had worked only 3 JAs ever on 160 from Kentucky. And in 2018, I moved my inverted L out to the farm and put it on the 50-foot tower and just put in 8 reels just as a temporary thing. I worked 10 that winter, but then this last winter when I put in the inverted L on the big tower, the 80 radials and the receive foursquare, 140 JAs, 143 JAs. And you can see what I did in countries. In the last 5 years, I've added 56. I think the question is, with this system, is it enough to get me to 250? I don't know yet. I think time will tell, and we'll have to see how I do over the coming. And of course, we have sunspots coming, which are going to deteriorate conditions on top band. So I think it's still going to be a real challenge for me to get to 250. But that's part of the fun of it, isn't it? This is what I've done in some of the contests. You'll see CQ Worldwide, I worked 51 last November and about 48 in the ARRL. And in the 160 in January, 55 countries. And this is just some of the DX I worked. I mean, JT5 DX, I worked them on both 160 and 80. This winter, the TC0, which is Turkey, called me, came back to my CQ in the DX, in the ARRL DX. And I worked Oliver, ZD7W on both 160 and 80 as well. So that's just a few of the countries I worked this year, but it really has made a difference. Any questions? Okay. Now the next project after this was the 80-meter foursquare. And this I decided to go with DX Engineering. I have the VA2 verticals, 70.5 feet. They're tuned for 3.505, and then you space them though, 67.5 feet apart for 3650. And DX Engineering, Tim Duffy tells you that when you do that with their phasing unit, you can get 1-to-1 SWR across the entire band. And that's exactly what happened to me. It's just remarkable. Of course, the phasing unit is controlled remotely via wireless. And then I run 12 volts out there for the switching of the control unit with an MFJ bias T. And then I put down 190 quarter wave radials. And I'll get into that here in a second. Now the Kaler brothers, the sign company, they had a 42-inch auger. So when we put these masts in for each vertical, they just drilled a 7-foot hole, or maybe 6 foot, I guess it was. We put a little gravel down in there, and then we built a little platform. These guys were great. We squared it off at the top. They put a rebar down in there, a little bird cage of rebar. You know, put the cement in, and then this is the control unit in the middle of the array. This is early on when we were just installing it. And then I mentioned, of course, we ran a 450-foot cable run. I used LMR 600. I didn't go hardline. I felt for 80, I really didn't need to. You guys may tell me differently. And that's the little bias T that sits in my shack, and that connects to a 12-volt supply, and that little bias T sends 12 volts down the coax to the control unit. And then those are the little components for the wireless GH everywhere control. And that little middle box is a pano antenna that I point down to the controller, which is about 450 feet away. And that's how I switch the directivity of the array from the shack. First, I talked about my radials. I followed the DX engineering and the conventional standard by putting a ground bus in between the verticals so that when the radials began to overlap, they were actually soldered to the ground bus. And I crawled around on my hands and knees for about a month doing that. And there's a shot of how I did it. I actually did it 2 ways. I used a brass connector to fit the radio onto the bus, which was, I just used solid copper wire for that. And then I went around with a blowtorch and soldered all those joints. And that I did all myself. And like I said, it took about a month. This is what it looks like when we were installing the bases of the verticals. And this is what they look like when they're installed. Yeah, what's really neat about them is there's a little crank, what do you call it? A little thing to crank them up, a winch, and they just lay on the ground and one man could just easily just crank them right up. They're very, very easy to work with, but they're very sturdy. They do blow a little bit in the wind, but not much. I've had them up, one winter now and through a couple ice storms. This is a look of this 4-square array from the very south end of my property looking north. And then you see the 80-foot tower and the Pro there in the, in the far middle, and the other towers are way up there. You can't really see them. So how does it work? Well, you can see in the CQ Worldwide, I did pretty well. 96 countries on 80, which is a lot for me. I don't know what you guys do, but I was really hoping to get 100. I'm going to try. I'm going to hopefully work 100 countries in next, in a contest one of these years. And I could actually run EU stations on 80, especially at their sunrise. As they're getting up, I can sit there and run them, and they just keep coming. A lot of DLs, Fs, France, that sort of thing. You can see there the AWL tests I did also about 350 contacts, 81 countries, not quite as many. Okay, now the next project was 6 meters. And as you recall, when I was looking at my goals, 6 was going to be very, very important. The question is, can I get up to 150 countries? I don't know. But I chose a JK67 antenna, which is a 7-element. Let me go back up. 7 elements on a 30-foot boom, and I use an alpha spid rotator because I do mount that on a on a pipe. It's on an MA55 tower. And there's the Kaler brothers putting the foundation in again like they do. That's the JK67. You can see how the MA55 will tilt out over, so it's really easy to work with. I can raise and lower it by myself, and I can put that antenna, take it on and off by myself. And that's it up at 55 feet, like the photo that I showed earlier. Okay, so how's it doing? Well, this summer this is the first summer I've had it up the whole time. I got it installed kind of the middle of last summer, but I was traveling a lot in July, and so I missed a lot of last season. And so far this year, you can see I've worked all continents on 6. I've worked 242 Europeans as of today. I had 10 more today. The 14 Asians, 13 of them were JAs, and then I had that one Korean. And then, of course, those 6 Hawaiian stations. Africa, I've worked, I guess, mostly EA8, Canary Islands, but I did work TT8, Chad. And boy, I heard 6W and TZ on 6. They were a couple, I couldn't break the pile up. They were there a couple mornings and just missed them. And you can see the new countries I've worked this year. If you recall that UR was my 100th. I worked those early on. And then the one since then, I've just been keeping track. What was really neat was last Sunday, I've been kind of following the JW7, Peter, and I had a couple of traces of them on FT8, but never could work them. And then last Sunday, about 2 o'clock local time in the afternoon, all of a sudden, he was being reported on CW, and I turned my beam to the north, and he was kind of working guys to the east of me, and then all of a sudden, I could copy him, just Q5, and several local guys in the area, about 5 of us were able to work him. At one point, he was peaking S5 from Svalbard. And so we worked him, and the neat thing is, just yesterday, he showed up and confirmed. And that's just one contact I'm going to remember for a long time, because I don't know, I just never thought I would be able to work that guy. And, I just happened to be there at the right time. If you look here, we've worked 70 countries so far this summer. I don't know if it's going to hold up like this. Again, I have no basis of experience because I've only had this antenna up for really a year now, and we'll see how the rest of summer goes, and I have no idea. So the question is, I have 107 work. Can I work 43 more to get up to 150? That's going to be the challenge. So that's kind of an overview of the farm. Tried to do it in a little less than an hour. And by the way, that tower there in the right foreground is a 50-foot universal tower. It just happened to be an estate sale here in the area, and I bought a bigger base, put that up. That was the first tower I have, and I really right now use that as just for a multi-band beam for multipliers and working people off the back and that sort of thing. I should mention that we did a lot of work on grounding. That's a whole presentation in and of itself. But in general, we put in about 20,000 or more feet of wire and cable. When you count all the ground radials, the ground wire connecting ground rods, and the feed line cables. We put in 35 8-foot ground rods in a hub and spoke fashion around the 3 towers. And then we even ground all of the verticals for the 80-meter foursquare. And this trench you see, runs 450 feet through the whole middle of my property. And we have ground rods spaced about every 16 feet there, 16 to 18 feet. And then we do a lot of extensive grounding in the shack. And of course, all of that connects to the electrical ground, you know, as well, which we followed, you know, the ARRL grounding book, you know, as much as we could, and the code, electrical code. I actually had electricians help me with a lot of it. So that's a final look at the property. You don't see all the wire and all the work that went into it. All the grass is grown over now and it looks kind of neat and tidy, but there's a lot more to it, as you guys know, you know, to make a station work the way it should. So, is the farm helping in my quest for 3,000? Well, the very top line shows where it was in 2015, about 2,500 countries. And the second line shows where I am today, 2,778. So I've improved 224. And if you look at it compared to my goal, 4.5 years ago, I needed 444 countries. Isn't it funny how math works out? I updated this yesterday and I realized I've exactly halved the goal. I now need 222. These are confirmed, by the way. I've worked about 10 more than this, but this is confirmed. And then you can see that where I need the work is still, you know, where I kind of put the emphasis, 160. I don't know whether I'm going to be able to do it with the inverted L and the receive four square. I think on 80, I'll be okay with the four square. It is a barn burner and I get people's attention with that antenna. And I think I'll be okay on 80 and 30 with the Pro. Need some sunspots on 12 and 10. And then the other question I have is, do I even need more aluminum for 6? If I'm going to get up to 150 or more on that band. I really like what my new 7 element is doing, but I may need more ammunition, more aluminum up in the sky to, you know, to keep going. I know it's going to slow down eventually because you start working all the easy ones and it just seems like it's going to get more and more difficult. But that's, to me, the fun of the challenge. So that's the last look of the farm. And by the way, that is what I see looking out my driveway. That's directly across the road, this big farm. And I'm thinking, worst case, do I try to talk to the farmer about putting up a 4 square for 160 and maybe some beverages? I guess I have to think about that, and we'll see where you know, we're just going to have to kind of figure out, you know, where I am a few years from now. So that's all I have. I guess I'm open for questions if I can hear everybody or if anybody has anything.
Hey, Dave, this is Ned.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Ned.
Okay, so when you were with us in Suriname, we had to listen endlessly to your statement about living in the black hole in Western Kentucky. After working, what was that, 75 Europeans at one morning on 6 meters, do you still feel like you're in the black hole?
Well,
propagation?
I knew that was coming. And it's interesting, you know, when I think back on it, you know, I've been working 6 meters now, only for about 10 years. And the first 8, I had just a 3 element Yagi on 6, and a good portion of that, I just had 500 watts. And you know, what was interesting, when I think back on it, we would have, you know, the East Coast would have these European openings, and I would sit there and I wouldn't hear a thing. But, you know, think about the antenna I had. And so I'm realizing this summer with the bigger antenna, the 7 element, I'm just hearing much, much better, and I'm catching the tail end of the propagation many days enough to work a lot of the Europeans. Not like the, you know, I will remind you, I was going to tell you on the first slide and I forgot that map of where Paducah was. Paducah is almost exactly halfway between Arizona and Portland, Maine. You know, so it's not like I'm right there next to WW1L or K1TOL. But I have noticed this summer, with my bigger antenna, I am able to participate in a lot more of these openings. So I think part of my black hole problem was probably due to my poor antenna systems in past years. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, yeah. What you're finding is what we see out here is that on 6, you have your moments where it's your band and doesn't, you know, and of course the crybabies on the East Coast will complain anytime someone other than them is working anything in Europe. And we have our moments out here, but they're just desperately short. I mean, you know, you can count in minutes. I mean, my whole 45-year career on 6 meters here, the band has been open to Africa, not EA8, but the mainland Africa, a total of 10 minutes.
Yeah.
In 40 years. So it's just the distance is the issue. And what you're finding this summer is that you know, there are days when it's your time in the in the sunlight, and you were trying to compete with the East Coast when they had their moment, and you can't do that.
Right.
You have to be there at a different time. Great talk, Dave. Really, really nice.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I've had 4 or 5 mornings this summer that I've just kind of owned the band into Europe for, you know, at least for where I'm working for probably an hour or 2, you know. And so it's just really, really been fun. Now, we'll say this. Today, I heard 9K2. I decoded 2 9K2s, but I couldn't work them. They were like a -13, and I had a shot at them, but they didn't hear me. And then later, early afternoon, I heard Alaska for the first time. And WL7N, you guys have probably worked them. But, you know, that is a tough path. You know, where you guys have tough paths into Europe probably, when you look at Alaska, it's all over land. And there's no water and between me and Alaska. So that was the first Alaskan station I've ever heard was today. And I didn't work them. I thought I was going to. I was going to be able to tell you guys I finally worked my 50th state on 6, but it didn't quite work out.
Dave, your 80-meter verticals, it looked like you had at least one set of guy ropes or something on them. Is it just one set you have on those?
Yes, and this is the middle range vertical that DX engineered. It's not that very top of the line one that has the 4-inch tubes at the bottom. These are 3-inch, and they did say that, you know, that you don't have to guy them. And I put the first one up and left it up for several months just to see how it did without guys. But the more I worked with them, I decided that I just needed one set. They're at 35 feet, and I haven't even finished putting them in. I've just kind of put them in temporarily, but I need to kind of tweak them a little bit. But when I just support them at 35 feet, it takes all the swagger out of them. And then when you get any wind or anything, they do taper a lot at the top, but it's just they don't move very much, you know, and they're very stable. So so far, I think all I'm going to do is just put one set of they already are. I have one set of radials for each vertical. One set of guy ropes for each vertical at about the 35-foot level, and that seems to do fine.
Ray, N6VR.
Hey, Ray.
Yeah, I'm north of Prescott area, about 140 miles north of Phoenix. I have 2.5 acres and access to 2.5 acres next to me. But I'm wondering about your ground. I just wonder, I'm sure your ground rods grow in the ground.
Oh,
Very
yeah.
easy.
No. Can't say that. That was a job getting those in, let me tell you.
Okay, well, I've used an impact. I've got about 40 8-foot rods myself. Some of them, certain areas, I've used electric impact wrench and I cannot get them in. I've had to cut them off. But
Yeah.
I'm concerned about the ground and maybe your ground connectivity, because that makes quite a bit of difference on 80 and 160. I have a high Z Foursquare that works good. It works great. And I'm contemplating a Foursquare out of irrigation pipe. But anyway, I'm kind of going back to the lightning protection part of it here. I've probably got $3,000 or $4,000 in lightning gear, because you get a strike and it blows out a K3. You got to do anything you can.
Yes.
So I'm just wondering about the ground. Like I said, I've got overboard and I've even disconnected antennas at times. But this lightning, we get monsoon lightnings that are just ferocious, like West Africa or South America or stuff like that, only for about 3 months. So I just wondered, do you experience that kind of lightning phenomena too?
Well, we can have some lightning out here. It's not as bad as Texas. I lived in Texas for 12 years, and the lightning there was just ferocious. But we do get them, and I've had really no issues, knock on wood. Now I realize that can happen anytime. I don't think I've had a direct strike yet, but by putting all those ground radios in, in the shack, I ground everything. I do have lightning arresters on the outside at, this tied into the ground bus, and then my 2x8 switch, when I, power it down, it, I guess grounds
all the input.
Yeah, it grounds all the input. So far, I haven't had any issues with lightning. And we had a tornado come through last summer when that really wasn't lightning, but I was there when we had about 100-mile-per-hour winds coming through, and fortunately, nothing got damaged except for one rotator slightly. But so now we'll say this: my AVAs, those for the Foursquare, the receive Foursquare on 160, I've had 4 of them go bad on me, and I've been out there twice now this spring. This is true confessions, and I was there when a lightning storm came through, and then as soon as it passed, all of a sudden, the green heron little switch box started, what do you want to say, rotating or switching back and forth. And I quickly realized that one of those AVAs seems to go out. It has a little printed circuit board in them, and there's little capacitors, and I've been sending those back to DX Engineering to get them repaired. They cost $60 to repair every time I send them back. And I need to call DX Engineering and find out what's going on there. I noticed they just put on the web a little repair pack for the AVAs with extra components. And I bought one the other day, and I just got it. And I may start to try to repair those myself, replace the capacitors. So evidently they're susceptible to static.
I've had the same thing with my Foursquare 2 different times. I've had 2 antennas on my south side affected. They went numb, went dead, and it was a high Z. I sent them in to be repaired, but it was like EMP. No direct strike, but it picked up enough voltage to blow the brains out of them.
Yep, I've had that. So what I did was I bought a couple spares. It takes 5 minutes to change one out, and it's real easy to track which one is the bad one. So, I want to stay up and running all the time. I never know when the next DX, needed DX station is going to show up. And even in the summer, I've worked some good 160-meter DX, over the years. So I want to keep them running. And those, let me tell you, that receive Foursquare really makes a difference. I mean, I can be listening on my inverted L, and noise is like 20/9, switch on the RX antenna, which is just pushing one button on the K3, and it drops down to like S3 or 5.
I've had the same experience. I know what you're like, what it works, but I just wanted to comment. I lived in Houston for a year, and I know what the lightning is like. We don't have it quite that bad, but anyway, I want to get off it. We
don't have it as bad as Texas here. There's no doubt about it. We don't get the constant lightning like Texas does. So I feel like I'm a little bit better off here than definitely down there. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
This is Larry W7R. A couple of quick questions for you on the roaming side of it. How do you handle AC power? You know, when you're going remote and you have a power failure, you got to be able to bring the station back up. And then also, how do you handle internet security?
Handle what at the end?
Internet security. How do you secure your remote site from hackers?
Well, good question. First off, on power, I am a little vulnerable there. There's been a couple times where power's gone out. And one time I was out of town, so I had asked one of my buddies to go out there and reboot the computers. I've looked into doing the, you know, power reboot things in the computers, and I haven't really got all that figured out. Now, all the computers have UPS power supplies, so they will typically come back. So yeah, that's a little, but the power's been fairly reliable. And, you know, but I am a little bit vulnerable there, especially when I was out of town for a while. And I do have my son in town. He's not a ham, but he's a handy guy, and I could always send him out there if something happened. Regarding internet, I don't worry about it too much. I just use Windows security, whatever that is. I just haven't had any issues with hackers. And I run a company, and we have 20 PCs, and we just use standard security measures, and we just haven't had, you know, very many issues in that regard.
Okay, well, if you're interested in the AC power solution, email me because I have one that works extremely well.
Okay.
And it basically, I can come back from a power failure hands off. It just comes back on its own.
Great. I'll do that.
Yeah. Any other questions?
It's Mike N7MW. I have a comment.
Yeah.
Dave, your now a novice call sounded familiar to me, and I went and looked in the box, and I found a card from you.
Wow.
WN3HOM, David Perry, 411 Longwood Drive, Exton, PA, for a QSO with me, WN7HRE, on August 4th, 1967. Apparently, I was your first Arizona.
Wow. Now, what band was that?
15 meters.
Yeah, that makes sense. I had a crystal for 21105.
I had one exactly the same frequency.
Yeah. That's amazing.
It says a Globe Chief on the back.
Yep.
Okay, well, hearing nothing, I think we ought to let Dave go here. It's 11 o'clock, and after 11 o'clock his time. On behalf of the club, I want to thank you for a very entertaining and informative talk. It was really great. Certainly talked a lot about things that I've been interested in, and I'm sure that's true of most of us. So fantastic. Thanks for coming by.
Very good, guys. Enjoyed talking to you. I always like working the guys from Arizona, and you know, you guys stay safe out there.
Hey, thanks, Dave. That was really awesome.
Thanks, Dave.
Yeah,
Thank you,
good night,
guys.
Dave. Thanks a lot.
You have a good one. I'm going to sign off.